Thank you very much. Next agenda item are the minutes from last time. If you have had a chance to review them, I would accept a motion to accept the minutes.
I move to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The ayes have it. And our next agenda item, rushing through today because it's already minute 2 of our meeting. Last time we decided that we wanted to keep abreast of a number of topics, so we decided, hey, let's just have the same kind of revolving business items so that we are able to do that. I don't have an update on anything public transportation related myself. Anybody else have something that we should? No? Okay, very good. Then we can move on to our, main topic of the evening, which is continuing to work on the road typology and complete streets policy. To that end, Lindsay has graciously created a first draft for us to work from and respond to. And before we get into it, I'll let you, maybe preface and maybe indicate some of the objectives that go along with this as you understand it.
Yep. So, at our last meeting, we've gone through the mapping exercise to take a look at the streets and discuss the various typologies of streets that we have and want to have in Newmarket. And at our last meeting, we kind of reviewed that example design standards, design and construction standards for streetscapes from the city of Lebanon. So I took our notes on that discussion and kind of reformatted or incorporated what we had discussed in terms of the functional classes that we feel we have in Newmarket and or want to have. I added place streets in there because we did say we would like to aspire to have some, even though we haven't fully defined it yet, but we've got a placeholder there and we can kind of expand on this. So this is an outline and starting point, first draft, that we can work from to develop a complete streets policy for the town of Newmarket that can be presented to town council for adoption through a resolution that would make it an official town policy that can be referenced in our current site plan and subdivision regulations for roadway design, and that's where the majority of our current design standards on roadways, driveway access, and stormwater components of roadways all kind of exist currently. So we wouldn't necessarily be creating any new ordinance with this or new design standards. It would be kind of amending by adding a reference to this policy that should be considered in design of those new streets or reconstructions. So with the draft, I guess what would be helpful is we don't necessarily have to get into a lot of detail of the whole thing. It's very short. So it's fairly easy to just kind of skim through and provide comments at a later date that we can modify. But I think talking more about the functional class and the street typologies so that we could feel comfortable with what we're moving forward in terms of the streets. And we have a goal of developing that visual catalog of photos and examples of this kind of stuff, these types of streets. So I think having an agreement, consensus on what those types are and what we're looking to see and collect photos of would be a good starting point for now.
Thank you. So I think that's a good way to start to look at the the outline here and see whether we feel like it covers everything that it needs to cover. I'd like to also maybe have a conversation about the objectives for the Complete Streets policy. What are we trying to achieve with this? Essentially looking at the policy statement, but it does this cover what we're trying to do, and we can do that after the class conversation. But I think if I remember this correctly from reading other places' Complete Streets policies, there tends to be a statement to the effect that the objective here is to accommodate all types of users in a just so that we're clear on the outset that that's what our objective is, and that's what we're trying to accommodate, so that it's clear that no matter what the functional class is, all users need to be reflected somewhere in a safe way. Right. So and when it's a low speed road, safety is presented differently than when it's a road with a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. Okay. So responses to the classes of streets. Did you have a chance? Did everybody have a chance to read this before? Because if you haven't, then we can easily take a minute to read through it.
I did.
You did?
I've read it.
Okay. All right.
My takeaway primarily, two items. One, I feel like there's a level of confusion in my mind between destination and regional connector, especially since both of them call out things like Exeter Road. It seems like we should be going in order of magnitude, and a regional connector seems to be, to me, it's connecting the region. So it would be going from town to town or state roads. So it almost seems like regional connector would be the big thing, and destination might be a little bit slower speeds or smaller street. So I'm just not really clear on the clear differences between destination and regional connector, even though they're spelled out as examples, which is helpful. But I think that maybe the nomenclature, regional connector, to me sounds like we're going to Exeter or going to Durham or going to Dover or somewhere else in the region. Destination could be anything. I mean, I could be going to my next door neighbor's house as a destination. So to me, it's just a little bit confusing there. The only other item I had is I think that we should define Play Street to some degree right from the get-go, just so that it's in everybody's minds, because we all know we're just going to make a recommendation, and the council's going to play with it, the planning board may play with it, they'll all have their say, and so I think it's probably good to spell it out a little bit further so they understand what's a Play Street. I mean, they're going to be, I don't know.
I agree with you. I only put the title there because that's as far as we discussed.
Yeah,
I didn't have
okay,
anything to write in.
Yeah. I think overall, I think it's great. I like the fact that it's short and sweet, to the point, boom, boom. It's not 27 pages nobody reads, because that's problematic, especially in today's society. People want to read 2 pages and have an idea. Those are my only comments. I think that somehow we could clean it up so it's a little more clear, more logical.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else?
Okay, I guess more just a general question, like how much wordsmithing do we want to do right now? Do we want to do wordsmithing, we're looking at overall impressions?
I think we wordsmithing should come maybe a little bit later.
That's what, okay.
Yeah.
And I have nothing to say at the moment.
Okay. Very good. Austin?
Well, I did want to talk about bicycle lanes. I think last meeting I accidentally misspoke and I said that local collector would be like would be the most the one you would most want to possibly put like a separate bike lane on, but I think actually regional connector, the faster the traffic, the more separation you'd want as a bicyclist, so I think I maybe have that backwards. I don't know, that was about it. And also, I was thinking about, for local streets, if we wanted to say anything about like width or, any type of sort of like traffic calming in general, like as opposed to maybe some of the cul-de-sacs that you see now are very wide streets, sort of faster streets, and whether it would be appropriate to say something about maybe we want those narrower, slower. I think narrowing a street is, I would assume, one of the more cost-effective ways to slow down traffic. I was just thinking about that for local streets, quiet streets probably specifically.
So that was traffic calming measures and road width and, are you suggesting we should include maybe some examples of traffic calming or, I mean, we
I don't
will
know.
have a catalog of pictures, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think road width might be something to say. I mean, I think as far as quiet streets, we probably know from the get-go that these shouldn't be very, like, super wide, Yeah, so I was thinking about that.
Okay.
Should the language say something about traffic calming should be considered if there are, I don't know, do we bring police reports? Do we say, like, I guess my question is, at what point, how are we going to say in here at what point traffic calming should be considered? Like, what's the criteria?
I think my take is that all quiet streets intended to be a quiet neighborhood street should consider, and it can be that last line, maybe we just modify that, when feasible, quiet streets include trees, traffic calming measures, and more narrow road widths, so that there's still some flexibility to modify that case by case as designs come up, and it's not too prescriptive, but it does require that those elements be incorporated when it makes sense.
A quiet street. Makes sense. This is, so I read this to somebody, and their comment was, well, if somebody told me I wasn't living on a quiet street, I'd be pretty upset. That the concept of quiet street was, shh, there won't be a lot of noise, there won't be a lot of partying, there won't be any fast traffic. And I thought that was an interesting take
Yeah.
to me,
Yep. I think there probably would be similar reaction to Play Street as well. That, a little confusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did that person happen to have an alternative suggestion?
No, it was just.
That was one that we had considered neighborhood street.
Yeah.
Neighborhood street.
Neighborhood streets.
Which would kind of imply that there will be other users in the roadway, families live here, just more of a neighborhood feel. So maybe that's a better term, but I don't know if they had more to add to that.
No, it was just, that was just the statement.
That was their one input, one comment?
Well, there was other comments, but that's the one that was, to me, was
Stuck
like,
in your mind.
I hadn't thought it, like,
Yeah.
because I had said, what if people think I live on a quiet street, so I started, like Carol always says, who's our audience? Who's going to be reading this? And if somebody reads it and says, X street, that's a quiet street, I live on a quiet street. not really knowing what that means, it could be misinterpreted. And that's when this person said to me, well, if somebody told me my street was not a quiet street, I would be upset.
I think the audience really will be design professionals in construction projects and in subdivision approvals and things of that sort. That would be the real target
Yeah.
audience. There may be other readers, but I think this is really targeted to those who are making the decisions on how the street's going to be constructed. The
Developers
Yeah.
and
developers and
design
just-
engineers.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to talk to those folks too, because, I just know that so many want some direction, like something I can read. I can follow your rules if you just put them down on paper
Yeah.
for me.
Is residential appropriate? I mean, what we're calling quiet street isn't necessarily residential.
I do like
Is it-
neighborhood.
Yeah,
I think I like neighborhood better than quiet, actually, I'd say, but.
in residential, I mean, there's lots of streets that aren't necessarily quiet, but there are people who live there. and
Right.
That are
it's,
residential.
Right.
Neighborhood, I think, works. I have a picture of when you talk about a neighborhood street, I have a sense of what you're talking about. My sense might be a little different than yours, but I think you can party in a neighborhood if you want to.
Yeah, but that does lead to the confusion by the
Yeah.
term, and maybe the term should be a little more clear.
Yeah.
And residential or neighborhood
Yeah, I
does
think
make it a
that-
little bit more clear to the masses.
I mean, it could be neighborhood/residential
Yeah.
to make it a little bit, to clarify it a little bit.
Or residential neighborhood
Yeah,
slash.
yeah.
I prefer.
I mean, I think it's in the end, it's a matter of the definition and how well the definition carries the objective. that we-
I would maybe shy away from residential because that is part of zoning, and there may be
Okay.
some confusion with the
Good point.
term
Okay.
Good, that's a valid point.
as a zone versus a street.
Right.
Okay, that is valid. But residential, commercial, rural, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So the whether it's quiet street or neighborhood street, or whatever we end up calling it, in here, it references essentially a street that has through traffic. A lot of, quiet neighborhood streets are cul-de-sacs. There are quite a few, especially in Newmarket. And I wonder if so the through traffic piece doesn't really apply. And I wonder if that is, do we need to treat that kind of a street differently than a street that essentially carries traffic from one point to another, that cul-de-sacs may empty onto? I'm thinking a cul-de-sac is the least likely place where you would need bike lanes, for example. But you might want to provide some kind of, whether it's a separate lane or some other means to indicate that bicyclists are to be expected on the street when it's a neighborhood through street. Because it could be fairly long, it could be, could carry quite a bit of traffic theoretically. So it should we differentiate there? Would that carry a different, would the objective be different there? If you're thinking about a developer as the audience, would we want them to think about a through street in a different way than when they're designing a cul-de-sac?
I would say yes. I would think so.
And based on, what are you thinking?
Traffic counts, emergency vehicle access. I think that as soon as you have a cul-de-sac dead end, there's almost an expectation kids are going to play in the street. There's, that activity you really want that to be a narrow road to manage vehicle speeds. And I always feel that signs don't matter. Road conditions determine vehicle speeds. I was just on River Road in Exeter, Stratham, today, and I was amazed how nice and narrow it was, and you just didn't want to go over about 22. You know, and it's like, yeah, you feel like, and it's, I just looked on the map, it's decent-sized development in there, but you don't want to go fast.
River Road's it's an old street, it's been there.
And there's a number of streets off of it, it's not a
Right.
dead end or anything,
No.
it's, well, there's no outlet, but there are quite a few residences up there, but you don't go fast. Once it narrows down and gets into the residential area.
So, would a cul-de-sac then in a neighborhood environment be a play street?
I would think so. You know, as a kid growing up, yes, they were, absolutely. You know, you play basketball, street hockey, whatever.
Yeah, especially the end part, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we did it all over the place, you know, in the middle part, you know, just street hockey, all you have to do is set up anything for nets.
Yeah.
You know, it could be two boards, you know, so it's, I mean, that's what you do, you play in the street,
Right.
pavement. Skateboards, you know, it's, the whole thing about skateboarding isn't a crime, I mean, it's all the kids who used to get busted for skateboarding on the street.
Right.
So you know, and going along with that play street, you know, when we had kind of I think something about, you know, where you expect people to be in the street, right?
There's
That's
an expectation of children to play.
right.
Right.
Or
Adults.
adults who play, right?
Adults at play.
Um,
People at play.
People at play, exactly right. So I do think that there is that maybe gets us a little closer to the difference between a neighborhood street and a play street, the fact that it's not a through street, right? I mean, when you do have through traffic, it's difficult to assert that you should be able to play basketball in the street. So that may be one thing. The other piece that I'm kind of missing in the and I know we're not following what we said. But let's go back to the functional classes. Let's go back there because I think otherwise we're going to get into the weeds again. So I can't remember who you said that, Mike. The difference between regional connector, destination, local. I do think that regional connector may be the first one we list and destination the second.
In terms of a hierarchy.
Yeah, in terms of a hierarchy, and because it kind of it seems to flow better that way. And destination, the title we may want to play with a little bit also.
So,
And go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, maybe what we need is, since we've talked about destination as being like Main Street, there's some place to go.
Yeah.
Maybe what we need to do is reference that in the description, that there is a destination, basically. We call this a destination because there's lower speed streets with ample sidewalks so that people can access, I don't know,
Businesses.
businesses
Yeah.
or
Right.
cultural
Yes.
attractions or et cetera, et cetera.
But it's a good point. I mean, I think that to me is what the definition of a destination street would be, is that there's shops and like I said, the coffee shops. But if there's confusion, it's how do we clarify it without adding too many more words? Because I think we're going to try to, pigeonhole ourselves into a destination is, for example, businesses, shops, etc.
Well, it's a little bit of wordsmithing, I guess, at
Yeah,
this
no,
point, but, I mean, Mike, do you feel like if we said, if we defined destination, if it's said in there that the distinction is that this is, there's an attraction there. I'll just say attraction as a
Yeah,
general
attraction,
word.
yeah, that's-
You know, that could be a cultural attraction, it could be town hall, it could be shopping, restaurants, whatever. That's what would that clarify the difference between destination and a regional
Well, I
collective
think
for
it's-
you?
I think it, just, in my mind, the hierarchy is regional, just means regional. It means
Right.
from community to community. So that really is something that's, in almost going to be a state road in our case. It's, I won't even get into other people's cases. So I just feel like that's where you start with the biggest, just go in order. As far as defining it, I guess a part of the confusion was Exeter Road's listed in both, so it
Right,
just
I-
makes it, to me, very confusing.
And it is, and the thing is, I can see where you're making that distinction. Is there some way we can more clearly define the part of Exeter Road that's a destination? And I'm trying to think, you can't say Rite Aid anymore, because Rite Aid may not.
It's really the
isn't there.
car wash is so I think it will be easier to define in the hopefully very near future when we have an urban compact designation for a portion of Route 108. So it will be the urban compact segment of
Yep.
Exeter Road, which would be from the car wash, and it's really the urban compact. What we're working toward is an agreement with DOT to reclassify from the car wash,
Sure.
which is like that curve where it clearly goes from rural road to, you slow down, the speed limit changes, there are sidewalks, there are commercial businesses, and as you're moving north through downtown and across the bridge and continuing to the town line. So it would be from car wash to town line. That would be urban compact.
Kind of the
Designation
same as the
portion.
potentially new village core district.
Yeah,
Mm.
it is the same.
And so we have a maybe reversing the order. The other piece that's kind of missing, I think, is how are cars that are not moving treated. And I think the expectation. So where does parking happen?
Okay, parking.
Yes, parking. Right. The expectation is not that there will be on-street parking on a regional connector, right? We wouldn't want to design the road to have on-street parking because it impacts the safety, and so and we probably don't have the ability to do so anyways because it's a state road, oftentimes. But especially in the destination class, I think we need to reference parking and how parking is, what our goal is as far as the treatment of travel lanes, parking, bike lanes, or bike traffic. How does that work? And just a statement to indicate this is our, some people say, well, you should have the parking between the travel lane and the bike lane to create a buffer. Others say that's not such a good idea because, so there are all sorts of ways to think about it, but I think we need to somehow reference parking here because I think it's a really critical element of the destination street, because the whole point is to be able to stay there.
Access things. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I think in that case, we have to find a way to integrate some wording around parking. And it doesn't have to just be for cars, can be for bicycles too, but because I think that differentiates it from the regional connector as well.
Sort of along those lines, do you also want to reference access to public transit? We don't currently have a lot of that, but we don't necessarily want to lose the bus stops that we do have.
I think it is a good idea to reference bus stops or the public transit for that very reason. even though they may not be used right now, the hope is that they will be needed in perhaps a not too distant future, meaning like the next 5 or 10 years or so. It's easier to work with something that you have in terms of things like bus stops than to create new ones.
Yeah?
Well, is that implicit in the phrase facilities for all types, for all travel modes, and
Yeah.
including public transit?
Yeah.
You know, the idea that, okay, there's going to be bus stops, or, is that implicit there, or do you feel like it needs to be
Well, we've got
stated
vehicles-
explicitly?
well, we've got vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians, and public transit, and facility. Yeah, I guess facilities would cover it.
And along that line, public transit is, I mean, I don't know if we should go there, because I'm not sure that it makes sense to talk about something that doesn't exist. And it's so unlikely you know, I was thinking, you know, a bus stop on a regional connector is very likely too, but it's not worth it. So let's not go there.
Okay.
If that's okay. And then shading. We mentioned street trees, which are great, but too often when we think about street trees, we think about, you know, a line of trees instead of kind of bunching things and creating shady spots in the roadway, places that, you know, so kind of a placemaking thing, where you create a place to stay, be in the shade, and then you know, walk on. So it's not it takes away that linear aspect that streets often have, where, you know, you create kind of a point that everything moves toward, and by creating spaces along the road, you slow traffic down, because it's not these 4 lines that are always the same, and you do create shade, and you do create a place for people to stop and connect. So connection is possible, kind of like a pocket park would, or something like that. And so we're mentioning street trees, but I think based on the conversations that we've had previously, I think what we're looking for is more of a placemaking and, you know, and shade kind of approach, especially in the destination and neighborhood streets. Even though, I mean, I think in regional connectors that would be really lovely too, but because initially we were talking about placemaking as a function of the destination street, and the question is, how does that happen? And I think using trees for that purpose, it would be really, really helpful, really nice. So that we don't run into the issue that we have currently on Main Street. We have, you know, a bunch of trees, and half of them just don't do very well, because, you know, they kind of, you know, they don't have the room that they need, or it's not quite the right environment. So we don't ask trees to do something that they really don't want to do, which is growing in the middle of a, you know, asphalt,
Right.
you know, or a sealed surface. So we give them a little bit more room, and when it's not also a sidewalk, but a place where you stop, then you don't need to seal that surface either. It can be, you know, open, and we have a bench and you can sit there, or, you know, grassy area.
Well, I think that as in regards to the trees, this all speaks to existing trees, and I actually think that it might be a good idea to toss in the idea of this document might be utilized for new construction as well, and therefore we might want to have some specific idea of, you know, a street tree shall be provided every 100 feet, or something of that sort, something specific that somebody can design to and say, okay, I need a tree every 100 feet or 150 feet on both sides, or the south side, or whatever. But Also, I think that it's important, just talking to landscape architects who have just said that the whole idea of using a monoculture on any block is a really bad idea. One tree dies and you can tell that one got replaced because all the other ones grew and then you have a small one. So so it's, and then of course some of the trees that were chosen may not have been the best. But a mixture of trees that are designed for the environment. There are a lot of DOTs put out list of salt tolerant trees, and we can find trees that do very well in the city. I think that it would be really neat. I mean, Elm Street was, I'm sure, named because there are a bunch of elms on it. Maple Street was probably named because there are a bunch of maples on it. It would be really neat to plant those trees along those streets too. Make it real. Why is it Elm Street? Why is it Pine Street? Oh, I got a clue.
Who's in charge of trees, as it is? What department is?
Like the trees in the right of way?
The
Just,
tree warden, are you?
I don't know, like, we're talking about trees right now. I mean, how do the tree decisions get made currently? Is this our jurisdiction?
It's a fair question.
No.
because
It's
I
our
think to myself,
jurisdiction.
Because we all know what you mean when you see the two little trees, but who decides that the one tree has to be cut down? Is there a tree officer in town? I don't think.
There should be a
No.
tree warden.
A tree warden.
And we're a Tree City, USA, so we have to have a tree warden. I believe it's fall into Public Works now. It was Diane Hardy once upon a time. But in some towns, they have a forester or
For an arborist, that's part
Yeah.
of the public works staff, yeah.
Yeah, because I know it is referenced, in the protection of existing trees, that an expert in urban tree maintenance would be consulted. And maybe that's just part of it, that anything, when we're talking about trees, is that the town will consult with people who specialize in that field, who have the knowledge. Whether it's for urban tree maintenance, or replacing trees, or landscaping. There's people who, they go to school, they get learned for that, so.
Right, and we're a small town, so we may not be able to have somebody who's really got the forestry background or the arborist background, but we can also, outsource
Yeah.
something of that sort on the occasions that we need, because it is unfortunate when we do something and then some landscape architects comes around a year later and say, well, that wasn't the best choice.
Right. But back to so the trees kind of took their own, but the idea of placemaking and using trees to play, that was kind of the whole,
Yeah.
the placemaking piece. Is that something that we should reference in the destination definition? Because it gives it a real distinction.
I feel like that should be more in the description,
Mm-hmm.
on the next page.
Oh, yeah,
Because I think
that's true.
I see.
how much explanation is going to be, because right now I understand exactly what you mean by placemaking streets, because you've explained what you mean by placemaking trees. So I'm thinking once again in terms of one of the values of this document is that it is concise, it is not overly wordy. And we just need to figure out a way to get that idea across without getting too lengthy. Because I think if I had just seen, trees for placemaking, I would have been.
No, I'm thinking about how to reference placemaking as a function of the street. I guess that the term destination might do that, but I don't know if it does. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about placemaking last.
And trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Again,
we could actually just say something in maybe a destination street that consideration to placemaking shall be a component of the design standard or something of that sort, just so that people are thinking, oh, do we want a little place for a bench and a tree?
We can add it as, right now it's just a paragraph, whereas the local one has numbered bullets. We can add multiple bullets under.
And just it can
Those
be
things.
considered, and then that way you're not tied to it, but we got to think about it.
So in the, under the functional classes, under the definition of destination, in addition to saying there is a destination, we could say that there are, trying to think of the words, place-making aspects or place-making features. It's probably not good wording, but, so to say that a destination road has these different place-making elements, there's a word, yeah.
Because
Does that help?
that is the function, right, of the
Right.
street, to be a place where you
Right.
where you stay and or
Yeah.
and
So
do
the-
something.
So there is again, an idea, not specific wording.
Yeah.
There are two things we're defining here that's in destination. We're defining that there is a destination. There is something you're going to, a cultural thing or whatever. And
Business.
then there's also, we want these streets to have placemaking elements included in them. Or that's what defines it as a destination, because it has placemaking.
Right, exactly
Nice.
right, yeah.
I like that.
That's what defines it as a destination, because it has those elements built in. And yeah, they may occur in other places as well, but that's kind of a must-have
Right.
here in order to make the street really work. I mean, that's kind of what we try to do on Main Street a lot, with
so it-
benches and,
Right, so if you look at Main Street, so where the
Yeah.
gazebo used to be, that's
yeah.
that's a destination or a place-making element. And the new park in front of is it Wiley Building, Willie Building?
Willie House?
Yeah, that and
Mhm.
the mural,
Right.
again, it's the same thing.
Yep.
The benches.
Yep. Okay,
And actually, maybe that's somewhere to reference that particular site, because as soon as you say it, it's like, of course, that's, in front of the Willie Building, and with the mural, it does create a little
Right.
separate space.
I wanted to say that I do think building like setback and height can also be used in a similar way with trees to provide you with that, shade. I'm not sure if that's something we could also, or if that's,
That would not
Appropriate for
necessarily
us.
be part of the streets, that would be
Yeah.
in the zoning
right.
regulations. But it's a good point, and I would say warrants further discussion with Bart as we're going through these zoning modifications to kind of ensure that that's a consideration with the form-based code and types of building options.
Right.
Yeah, that's a huge component of zoning. It's really the human scale but building height and setbacks. Part of zoning was about sunlight getting into buildings before they even many people had electricity.
Right.
Can I ask, this may be getting a little too nitty gritty with the separation here. So we have, the way that Lebanon structured theirs was functional class, and then the typologies are kind of a subset of the local. Do you want to have those as separate items, or do you want to have street typologies, and they include regional connectors, destination streets, local collectors, quiet streets, and play streets? Do you need to have the local with like sub types, or do you want to just have,
I'm not so
these are
sure
the
we
5 or 6
need
types?
to. I think it might add a level of confusion.
That's,
We're always a small town. And,
so it
the
could just
other thing
be,
is going to be a living document. We see an issue with it, it's like, it can be changed, a month down the road or 6 months. I mean, we don't want to,
right,
but that's the beauty of revision, this didn't quite work out the way we wanted, let's change it up.
yeah. And I bring it up kind of just as we're looking at the sections and subsections. They don't necessarily have to be separate. It can be street typologies, and here's the list of types, and then design standards for those types, and we can,
incorporate some specific bullets for each.
I do like the idea that we have 3 classes of streets differentiating, very clearly by this is a place where you arrive, where you want to stay. This is a place that carries you, from out of town into town, and this is a place that facilitates movement when you're in town.
Yep.
The local streets. And then, because local streets encompasses most of the streets, and because there are differences, we, delineate those differences.
Okay.
And I think that makes perfect sense, because not every, as we, discussed, not every local street has the same function or has the same character. So I think that follows really well.
Okay.
And then having design standards for the respective classes and typologies, that seems to be a good, so I like that breakdown.
That way it's set up. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know
No,
if I'm alone with that sentiment.
I think it's fine.
No,
Yeah.
I do think it's fine.
So, do we want to get into some of the design standards or the local street typologies? I think we covered fairly.
I think we've covered,
I just, daily here, but perhaps with the local street typologies, those are just subsets of local streets, so that,
Mhm.
drives you. So maybe rather than having 1 and 2, this becomes A, B, C,
Just
under,
an-
yeah, just.
Could be
Okay,
that, yeah.
Just indent.
That works,
yep.
Format, indent, and do, and that covered,
yeah.
makes it clear that, yep, okay, next page.
I think that clears it up. I think that's the solution, yeah. I mean, for me, it's just like, oh,
I like
yeah,
that.
she's right, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
There it is,
So it doesn't-
Sure.
yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Yep, that would work well.
So to your question about getting into definition stuff, I would say maybe we do have some other things to
Yep.
talk about, so maybe that's enough on this for now, and everybody has a draft of this. You can kind of, I took some notes on this, so I'll make some edits, and then if people want to give some thought to those definition pieces, we could kind of talk about that next time. Come back to that, or if people have notes that they want to send to Bart and I, and we could make note of that for discussion at the next meeting, do that.
Everybody comfortable with that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
One aspect maybe for consideration is just, it seems, and I've said this before, it seems every community is dealing with speed issues on a variety of road types. And everybody's thinking of traffic calming, and it seems that sometimes we design roads for a speed that we don't want people going.
Yeah.
And I think that our design should always be to design for truly the speed we want, not some 95th percentile or whatever it is. But what do we want? If
Yeah.
we want it to be 30 and the 95th percentile is 35, then we need to do something. Is put the road on diet, design in whatever curves and hills and whatever it is. I mean, I look at New Village and their problem with the exit, and
Yeah.
I looked at Cedar Street, and it's 24 feet wide coming
Right.
out. Well, of course, people are going to go the other way. It's as wide as a two-way street. It looks like one.
Yes, it does.
And it only is wide for the first block. It narrows right down as soon as you
Yeah.
get one block in. So it's designed to be a two-way street.
Yeah, I agree.
So it says what it is without, the sign say something different.
I think that that concept of designing the street to communicate the desired speed should be in our policy statement. It should be referenced there, because it's a very fundamental kind of idea that we are trying to communicate. with a complete streets policy. So that to avoid having to post tons of signs, remind, 25 here,
Right.
25. No, we know most people are gonna go 20 anyways because of the way the street works. And so we don't need signs. See, signs are kind of or should be for information, but speed, I don't know.
Interesting, London did a study with, I think it was just one block, but they took all of the road signs and all of the traffic.
Well, that's a city with
Out.
too many signs
And
anyways.
they took
Yeah.
everything out and to see how it functioned, and it worked well. People just figured out that, hey, I gotta go slow. There's no rules here. It's like, holy smokes.
There you go, exactly.
Well, I know if you're on a street, if you haven't seen a speed limit sign for a while, I know my automatic thing is, I'm going to slow down because I'm not really sure how fast I should be going, so there is a tendency to do that because,
Yeah.
unless you have your GPS on, which tells you what the speed limit is, but
Right.
that's,
So I made a note, under the definition of local streets to maybe incorporate that the design of the street should communicate the desired slow speeds. So we could put it there, see how that fits or works and move it or add it elsewhere.
So I was thinking maybe the wording should be more that the elements of the street will, the design elements of the street, or the, I'm trying to think of the words, will reflect the desired speed because, a road that is posted at 35 is probably designed for 40 or 45, right?
No.
No?
so.
You don't- the
maybe-
design speed.
Geometric highway design is that it's posted at the design speed, which is what is geometrically safe for vehicles traveling at that speed.
So maybe.
So if you want geometry, like he's saying curves and this.
Right.
To reflect 20 miles an hour, then you make them tighter and steeper, and
Okay.
so that's why all the highways have big sweeping curves, and because the posted and design speeds are much higher than at
But
the lower
the
roads.
posted speed is generally lower than the design speed.
It's
Like
like
on
the
a
85th
highway.
percentile, right, isn't it?
Mm, Yeah, I guess.
Typically.
So that's why I'm saying maybe we just have to watch that language a little bit.
Or maybe the design
Well-
of the street informs the desired speed limit.
Yeah, and that's kind of, so informs and reflects, those are good, but there are also specific statutes and requirements of what I know this sticking point that some of the public works community has, that New Hampshire RSA requires that roads can't be designed for anything less than 30 miles an hour when they're in downtown areas, where you want people to go slower, and you want to design for slower speeds. RSA says you can't.
I was going to
Design
ask
for
that
lower than
question.
that.
I wasn't sure if
So
that.
there
that is
are
so.
limitations to that we don't want to conflict with.
So that's exactly the point, is, if your road is designed for 30, but we want people to go 20, say, or, if the desire is for the speed to be lower than that, then the elements that we're adding, you're not changing the geometric design of the road. We're adding elements to reflect or to encourage the slower speed, but we are not changing the design of the road. That's the only reason I was
I
kind
see
of
what you're saying now.
grabbing
Yeah.
onto the
Yeah.
word design.
Okay, so I will give that more thought on,
So it's a communication element, not a
Not a
safety element.
design element, or design in
Or
terms
the-
of roadway geometry.
Yeah.
It's an aesthetic,
Yeah.
almost an aesthetic thing that causes.
Yeah,
yeah, it's more
And
of
I'm
like
sure I'm using the wrong words,
streetscape.
but-
No, I think that's what, yeah, I get what you're saying. I'm just not sure it's the streetscape elements that should inform and reflect that.
The desired speed.
Yeah. And maybe that's all it is, just streetscape elements, but I'll
so you're
Figure out how
you're
to say
saying the reason you want to put this under local is because of the restrictions otherwise that we might, or the statutes that we might otherwise run into trouble with, or
Not necessarily, just because it sounds like that's more, I mean, we're talking about this applying more to neighborhood roads and play streets, and, I mean, obviously, destination is a totally different thing. But
Yeah.
it sounds like we're talking more about that than we are the regional connector type streets. Am I
Well,
misunderstanding?
No, I think it comes into play
For
with the
all of them?
regional connector too, because as you know, as you come, say, for example, into Newmarket on some of these streets, the geometry, the design geometry doesn't necessarily change, but we want the elements of the road to indicate
right.
that it's time to slow down.
Yeah.
And not just the signing.
Okay, so I guess,
Seems that we're kind of playing a little bit of catch up, because for so many years, we had site plan review, site plan regulations that required wide streets. And we had no engineer. We didn't consult with engineers. We, essentially, the number was pulled out of a hat, and then we said, 24 feet, and places that I know of a town that said 26 feet, which is really getting to be kind of silly. So now we're
You need lanes to go from one side of the road to the other.
I know, it ends up being absurd, because every square foot of asphalt needs maintenance,
Yeah.
and the town inherits it.
And Lindsay, can I just ask for clarification for myself? The 30 mile an hour minimum speed, is that for all roads in the state, like going through Main Street, the state is saying, or
no, it's certain types of street. It's more applicable to, like, urban compact areas, and it does not overlap with like school zones and stuff
Right.
like that. It's a
Right.
different setup. I have not specifically read the statute. I've heard grumblings from friends about that being an issue in other communities.
I could see
Yeah,
it being-
I'd love to see that RSA, because so many people sometimes will paraphrase an RSA. I always love to, trust but verify.
So we're saying, add that to the policy statement, essentially, so that we have the design elements that should
Yep.
reflect the speed of the, okay.
Yeah, it should reflect the desired speed,
Yeah,
even if we can't state it.
yeah, no, I think that's, I don't see why that shouldn't be there. Okay. Then, why don't we, leave this for now and maybe think about it more as we, in between the meeting, and any thoughts or ideas that we have, note them down. And send them in to Lindsay, ideally, or
Bart.
or Bart, or bring them in to the next meeting.
Sounds good. I think sending it might be best just for a paper trail.
Yep.
And it
Right.
just, that way it doesn't get lost and everyone's got it. They can distribute them.
Did we want to try and elaborate on Play Street today? Are we still just at the name? Should we try and just say something?
Oh, I just put everything else cul-de-sac, not a through street.
Right.
I wrote the same cul-de-sac and expectation of people at play.
I think I think it could be a through street too, though. It kind of reminds me of like a pedestrian street, where like the traffic would be going like very slowly, maybe no through traffic. Is this
I
kind
can
of
certainly-
along the same lines?
Well, I don't know.
I could identify something like Central Street as almost a pedestrian street, or Church Street.
Yeah.
They may not be necessarily play streets, but something along those lines. A play street wouldn't have to be limited to cul-de-sacs.
But a Play Street the traffic would be going even slower than like a quiet street?
Traffic would be creeping.
I think a place, the difference would be that you don't differentiate between, so on a through street, you may want to have a bike lane, but
Yeah.
there's no way you would have a bike lane on a play street.
Yeah,
it would communicate something wrong, I think.
yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. That's but maybe not. Maybe you're right. Maybe there is a potential for for a street like Central, let's say, or a church, to be used to move bicycle traffic through, but not necessarily car traffic through.
Right.
And that could maybe coincide with play, but I mean, if we're going to have a play street, then I think it has to be very clear that the idea is that it's slow, that it's about it's almost like a destination in a way.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that it could be used, like similarly, like not in a neighborhood, like in like a destination street, like a not a like a pedestrian street, It would be similar, the expectation would be that there'd be people in the road, and as a car, you would move like, just extremely slowly and probably no through traffic.
Yep, I see what you're
It
saying.
would almost be this similar.
There's one aspect of Play Street that I'm a little concerned about, and it's the political side of people saying, what the hell is this? And, are you kidding me?
Right.
We don't need Play Streets there for cars. And would a different name soften that blow with that element?
Or just not to direct it specifically to children, well, not to limit it to children playing, but also like to anybody, being in the street for whatever reason,
Are there examples anywhere of play streets that could be referenced? Does anybody, I mean, I understood when you brought it up last time, as we discussed, I understood exactly what you meant. And as I said, I used to send my girls to the neighborhood behind me because they could ride their bicycles like crazy, where
Yeah.
my road was a little too busy. So how do we define that in a way that doesn't, and you're right, it could become,
Politically charged?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be something that we would post, at the beginning of the street, saying this is a play street necessarily. It's a more of a function, right? Is that this is this type of street, and so it's the design elements that would communicate that it's a play street.
Yeah.
And before we move further into that thinking, I see that you have something.
I do not.
You don't, okay. You mentioned pedestrian street, right? And that may be something we should hold on to for a further conversation as another type of street. So.
So I just Googled Play Streets, and apparently in bigger cities, Play Streets are temporary closed roads organized by community groups, recreation departments, where children can play and socialize. So Play Streets has somewhat of a definition in bigger cities. They close a street and turns into a street fair for a day or something like that.
In where I grew up, the cul-de-sacs might be designated oftentimes by the neighborhood coming together and saying, we would like this to be a play street, and they would put up a sign, and they might have some design elements to calm or slow down traffic even further, whether that's planting in the roadway, or something like that, just to indicate as you're entering that space that something's different. I gotta slow down. So that's kind of what I was thinking of when we said play street, that a place to, for kids, that's intended for kids to be able to do that,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there was a point in time where people, when they were driving, expected as you came into a neighborhood, that you slowed down, you expected to
Right.
see, when I learned to drive, it was always if you see a ball in the street, there's a
Right,
kid
expect a
running.
kid.
You expect a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that mindset is still prevalent, if that's something that people, but I know that was always, you pull into a neighborhood and you slow down because
Yeah.
you don't know who's going to, a kid, a dog.
How do you know that you pulled into a neighborhood? And that's where, that's kind of what we're trying to, I think,
Yeah,
determine, right? That that's communicated. You just pulled into a neighborhood,
Yeah.
you know, so,
You knew.
yeah.
I mean, you gotta, I mean, I grew up and I learned how to drive in New Jersey. We had traffic. So, but you knew, and you're asking me how I know, I don't know, you just knew. It was one of these things.
No, I mean, that was kind of
Yeah.
the point, I guess, that,
It's
you
like,
know.
how do you know?
How does one know that one entered into, that now I'm in this street? How do you know that? What is it, what elements communicate that? You know,
It's all of the
that's kind of,
infrastructure.
that's kind of what we,
Kids
what
running
we
into
need to.
traffic, I don't
Yes,
know.
Smaller
right.
road, more houses,
More
sidewalks generally, or
You know, in more urban areas, it could be, you know, neighborhood streets could be multifamily, apartment buildings. But chances were there were indications of, you know, people sitting outside or, you know, standing on the sidewalk talking to their neighbors. There was indication that there were people, but I can't really sit here and say, how do you quantify that? I don't have a good answer for that. I just knew.
Yeah,
And of course, the speed limits were 25 miles an hour, so that was,
It sounds like the Play Street, that description that you found, Mike, is sort of what was identified as a possibility for the segment of South Main Street from that triangle intersection with 108 to South Street, where they kind of outlined that that could be converted to one-way. There could be some additional parking. It could be closed for like community dinners and things like
Yep.
that. So maybe that's something to keep in mind as an option for future Play Street or something.
Yeah.
or community street,
Community
or
street, yes.
social.
Whatever the
Yeah,
name.
right.
Community Street, Social Street, yeah, something I think we're kind of all in the same boat. It's just what is the term we could use that would be most acceptable?
yeah. I
Well,
mean-
that's a completely different
Right.
idea from where we started, but a very valid and one that I think we should consider. I mean, the idea of having a place in town where you can block the street off and there can be, you know, a street fair, an art show, you know.
And that could still be part of the destination. I mean, it is part of the destination street definition.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose the Play Street as a concept,
Yeah.
as a concept to differentiate it from other neighborhood streets, where the point is simply not to move traffic. It's more of a place than it is a throughway. So I don't want to lose that, because I do think it does, for example, I'm also concerned that we don't want to create all sorts of design elements that add costs that are, you know, a real burden to a developer. We want to create something that I think is sensible and functional. And defining a street like a Play Street allows the developers, okay, I get the concept. How do I implement that? Rather than, having to have, going into lots of specifications that you have to meet in order to do this, we're letting the form do the talking. So, and then there's more opportunity to be creative for a developer.
Yeah, and I think that us essentially putting roads on a diet actually is what
Yeah.
developers asked for. When Rockingham Green was built, the developer asked for a variance to allow for the road to be narrower.
Yeah.
And I think we've all driven those roads, and they're plenty wide, but
Yeah.
they were not to our spec. He requested them be narrower, and they work fine.
So I mean, it's almost like we're distilling down to the fact that a Play Street is a cul-de-sac. And if a Play Street is a cul-de-sac, and is it possible to say that when a developer puts in a neighborhood, that there will be a cul-de-sac somewhere in the neighborhood?
Well, I think that it doesn't, I think that I was saying, and I think you were saying as well, that it didn't have to be a dead end. It didn't have to be a cul-de-sac. It could be a very small street, something like Church Street or, Central Street, if it were to be developed at this point in time, that could be a sort of play street. And certainly I know in like New Haven, we had a lot of small streets that you could just play in the street.
Yeah.
And they went on for a mile in one direction, but they were so small that cars went slow, and there's a stop sign every single block, so they never went
Right.
fast.
Right.
Yeah, and that's another piece too, is that there were stop signs.
And yes, and nobody took that road unless you were actually turning into a driveway there.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Okay, we moving on?
are we good? Yes.
Parking infrastructure.
20 minutes later.
Moving
we're
on, yes.
So do we have anything for parking infrastructure?
No, we don't have anything, that's the whole point, we need something. Mike.
Okay, well, I've got an observation.
I'm sorry.
I have an observation.
Yes.
That I had made.
Yeah.
As I got a car that's pretty short, and I can almost fit two in our parking spaces. So I measured them, and our parking spaces, for the most part, are 25 feet long. The International Code Congress model zoning calls for 20 feet, so we're 25% too big. I went up and noticed in Durham, they seem really short, and I mean, they're 18 feet 8 inches. So if you compare the 18 feet 8 inches to
Yeah.
25 feet, it's a huge difference. And I think parking is one thing this committee could really work on.
Yep.
To start making a difference. We hear it in every design charrette, every time we have
I agree.
any type of public feedback, they always say parking, parking, parking. Well, we can do some things for almost no cost,
Just
and we should just do those things.
repaint the spaces on the street.
Yeah, or repaint them or do away with individual spaces. And the other thing I noticed, a gentleman got a parking ticket, parking his motorcycle in one of those triangles at the end of the block. He was completely inside the white line, and he got a ticket, and he was pretty irate. He was like, "This is ridiculous. I came down here for a nice lunch. I thought it was a nice town, but not so much anymore." So there's no real safety need for that. So I think there are parking opportunities throughout the town that we can work on.
Yep.
And we should almost have almost immediate, like, what can we accomplish in 1 year, 3 years,
Right.
5-year goals, and maybe 10-year goals, because when people start talking about big things, it's a 10-year goal or longer. But I think that we should try and develop short-term parking improvements that are they're easy to come by.
Yep.
I mean, I guess the other example is somebody got a ticket in front of the town hall for parking more than 2 hours. Those spaces are almost always empty. Why do they have to be 2-hour limit? You know, maybe there was some people could move this way and free up spots from the downtown if they knew they could park there for 4 hours
So
or.
you mean the parking lot at Town Hall, it's.
No, right in front of the town hall.
Right in
There's
front
a
of the-
few spots
Yeah.
that, except for town meeting.
Very rarely used.
Right,
Right.
but they're 2-hour limit. If those limit was taken away, there'd be a bunch more people would want to park
yeah.
up here rather than having to move their car every 2 hours.
Totally agreed. I also agree with the individual, the marking of the individual parking spots. I think you'd find more, better utilization of the space if that were taken away.
So
We had
is-
like an engineer look at it, if we had somebody like that.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, we're not so blessed, I guess. No,
It's funny you brought that up because I was in town the other day, a bit ago, and I was looking at the parking spots, and I said that. I said, one of the reasons we don't have so many spots here is because the spots are so big. And then I thought, so I'm a transplant to New England. I thought, this is a New England thing. They need it for their big trucks. That's why they did this. That's what I thought. Like, okay.
Well, New Englanders can't
We're-
park. There's that.
well, I mean, I know that people, myself included, I will leave, proper distance to the person already or the car already parked there. But if that means that I'm over the line and I'm parking kind of in between two spots, then so be it. There's plenty of room behind me.
Right.
Why take up more room than you need for your car? And I think that's kind of the logic that the motorcycle rider
Right.
was employing as well. And that makes sense. So I think that's a good good tactic to employ, some very immediately achievable, very low-cost changes that would make a positive impact.
We could even just do pavement marking on those triangles, motorcycle, moped,
Right.
and people get the hint pretty quick. It'd be nothing. I think the idea of individual spaces comes from when you have a meter.
Yes.
You need to have individual
Exactly
spaces.
right.
We don't have meters. People can park as close to each other as they want.
Well,
Yep.
nowadays you don't necessarily have to have that because there's a lot of kiosks that just are a block and it
Yeah,
doesn't have
yeah,
to be
right,
individual
right.
metered or space.
But we
Yeah.
don't even have that, so it's like, why bother,
Currently, yeah.
limiting people to one space, it just doesn't make sense to me.
I was not around when the Main Street corridor was reconstructed and those parking spaces were designed and put in.
They would change too. It wasn't, that
Yeah,
was not the first
I
iteration. of-
remember that, well, and I have heard that there was a fair amount of controversy in getting the plans approved because it's DOT's road. So DOT had, and there was a requirement for a motorcycle space that was put there for a while and was never used.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then
on
it
the
was
other side of the
eliminated.
road, yeah, that
So
was silly.
I've heard that the parking is an issue, and it is, we have that parking study that the data collection has been done. SRPC is working on analyzing that data and putting together a report to give us some recommendations.
Mhm.
I will raise that point as they're looking through the analysis and what they had for usage and turnover. And maybe that's something that we can float to DOT and see if we have the ability to modify it so that it could just be blocks or bracketed or something that doesn't necessarily
I don't know that the individual parking spots are a DOT requirement.
They were not
I-
required by DOT, they had to be approved. So locations and sizes had to be reviewed and approved by DOT because it's their right of way and they,
So if we were to take out the,
if we make changes to it, they need to
And
have an
we
opportunity to
actually
review and
didn't
approve.
restripe them one year. Steve directed Rick not to restripe the
Do the paint?
individual, just do the fog line.
Mm-hmm.
And we did it, and it had mixed success. It was very successful in the main portion of downtown, in front of the Tilton Hilton. Some people complained because people were parking and not leaving enough room for a big vehicle, or whatever. They felt that they were parking wherever, and they didn't pull all the way up to the end of the block type of thing. But overall, I think that now, there are more and more small cars coming on the road. We can fit a lot more cars. Like I say, 18 feet 8 inches in Durham, all the way up Main Street. And that's an urban. That's not even an urban compact anymore. That's a town road now. That used to be Route 4. But for the most part, my experience is DOT is not that concerned with the parking delineation from fog line to fog line. They're very concerned.
Right.
But after that, they're just concerned drops off pretty quick. And I don't know.
I also like the idea of eliminating or lengthening the time that you're able to park in front of town hall, and going along with wayfinding and the possibility of indicating if you need to be here longer or you expect to be here for 6 hours, here are spots where you can do that. Because right now there is really no way for somebody to come in. You like, oh, I didn't even know there was a time limit or what have you. Or if they're all 2 hours, then what are we achieving by that? So I think having some different kinds of spots, and if you're going to be there for 6 hours, well, then you don't mind walking a
Right,
little bit
exactly,
farther.
right.
So I think that makes a lot of sense to maybe. And I don't know if the parking study will bring, or if we should expect the parking study to bring some of those ideas to the table.
It should
Okay.
incorporate some of that, because some of the concerns are with turnover, and getting the turnover is what leads to the 2-hour limits, but we have areas in town that people are parking in because it's not posted as 2-hour limit, people are parking.
Yeah.
So we know that there are other areas and spaces that people want to use that. So that is a component of what they're looking at, and we'll have some
Okay.
recommendations.
So we'll wait for the recommendations and then work off of that to see what we.
But I will
what
mention
ours are.
these things while it's in development.
Yeah.
So we can.
That'd be good, I think. And you don't have an idea when that study's going to be complete or back to us.
I haven't heard, no.
Yeah.
I know they said it would be a few weeks to like process the data and aggregate everything and then be able to present it in a way that
Yeah.
makes sense. So I imagine we probably hear pretty soon.
I guess they're not planning on doing Saturday morning or Sunday morning, because they were not able to do Saturday
because of the
morning because of the rain. And even Saturday afternoon, I was one of the volunteers on Saturday afternoon. And it wasn't until late in the afternoon, maybe 4 or 5, that the sun started to come out, people started walking, then the spots started filling up.
Okay.
So it was kind of like, wow, I feel like we've missed a real Saturday here in town, or Sunday. Sunday morning's very busy
Yeah.
in town. So I don't know if they're planning on doing that.
I'll ask about that. I don't know either.
Although I don't think this Saturday would be a better Saturday to do it anyway from what they're saying. It's going to be another.
Another rainy one.
And I think the police chief was working on some sort of proposals to modify our permit parking policies.
He is looking at that, and he's also waiting to see what the parking study
Yep,
has for
okay.
recommendations before actually trying to implement anything or
Yep.
suggest anything.
Will the study, or will the report recommend signage?
I believe so. In terms of increasing signage and
Yeah,
awareness
increasing
of where
or
to park.
clarifying or
Yeah.
placing it in the first place?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, so maybe, what other elements will the report include? Just to,
It'll include the data collection effort and some analysis to give us a sense of how many spaces we have, how utilized those spaces are during the data collection period.
Yeah.
How many spaces sit vacant for periods of time, and kind of just some general information about how they're used, and then provide some recommendations on ways to increase utilization of underutilized parking spaces and lots, and then ways to redistribute the ones that are overutilized. And by overutilized, it's hard to capture, we didn't capture information about people that came to town and didn't park because the spaces were full or they
Right.
couldn't find a space. So, kind of some recommendations to redistribute and increase the use in other areas. And I
Okay.
believe they will also give us some recommendations on adjustments to time limits and ordinance areas, or areas to address with the ordinance, and potential opportunities for increasing parking, because that was something else they were looking at with that. And there aren't a lot of opportunities, but we were trying to get creative that way. Kind of, Bart led that a little bit more with SRPC and just viewing downtown and where there are properties that there's potential for partnership or a parking garage, and thinking big.
thinking big, okay.
Yeah. I know I've mentioned this before, but I just did it again. I did parking near me, and the only town lot that shows up is Railroad, as far as parking.
Well, that's interesting, because when I did that was one of the ones I counted, was the railroad,
Mhm.
the one right up here by the town.
Yeah.
So- And there was nobody there
Yeah.
the whole time.
Yeah,
I guess-
I did that one
Nobody-
too, and there was
Nobody there.
It was only the construction vehicles from,
Right.
Right, there's hardly ever anybody there.
But that's the one that's showing up on his map.
Yes, that's the only one, except, well, the Elm Street lot shows up too, and as you can see, all the town spaces are, as usual, not very full, except for Friday, Saturday night, they're always full. But I think the town should really identify that on Google. You can make recommendations to Google Maps and add
Yeah.
them, but they want it to be a qualified person, not just anybody. Well, I could try it, but
oh, that guy, he's not qualified.
Right, yeah. No, it's just, these are things that, I've done that before, going to another town, parking near me, and, oh, okay,
That's a good suggestion.
Never done that. Now I didn't realize that you could just, yeah, why not?
yeah, it can be very helpful,
I imagine it could be. I learned something new.
especially when there's not very many signs.
Not much parking.
Right, right. Anything else regarding parking infrastructure? Lindsay? Okay. And signing and wayfinding, I don't think that we've made any progress on that thus far, but that's fine, I think, for now, because,
I'd just like to comment on the art.
Yeah.
The art displays, that they're the three-sided, I think there are
By
two
the
of them
library?
in town. There's one by the library and there's one by the old gazebo, I think. Have you seen them? They're three-sided, maybe, 5 feet tall, by each side is maybe 2.5
Yeah.
feet wide.
yeah, maybe a 3x5, 3x6 even.
And each side is covered with a piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, when I first saw them, I thought, ooh, what's going on in town? It
Yeah.
was,
Yeah,
oh, there's
I
something
really like them too.
interesting.
I noticed
Haven't
it,
seen
yeah.
them.
You haven't seen them? Nobody's seen them? The one down by the library has the two owls that are,
Yeah,
like, the entire panel
It's a
is
cool
two
image.
owls that are looking out at you. It's advertising the art show when they do the garden tours.
yeah, I like them too. I think it's a great, easy element to create some, something worthwhile to go to
Yeah.
and look at and to notice when you're driving through as well. Yeah, I think it's fantastic.
Everybody go look for the owls. They're down by the
Yeah.
library.
So the reason I think we should hold off on the signing and wayfinding is because if we think about the parking study and the impact that's going to have, I think it makes sense to wait for that and then move forward with any design ideas that we might want to consider. All right. Any other business?
I guess I'm just curious if there's any update on the traffic study by the police station,
Oh, yes, on
the
Oh,
roundabout.
the
Exeter
road
Road.
safety audit.
Yeah,
I have heard rumors that that VHB has developed some alternatives and some conceptual alternatives, and they are working on finalizing their report. I imagine we should be hearing more about that in the coming weeks, probably in the next month or so. I had a conversation with Colin Lentz at SRPC. He was the one that informed me of this because he had talked with DOT and VHB about that, and that and a couple of other projects. But he said that that's coming soon, and he inquired about potentially doing a pilot of one of the maybe middle grade alternatives. Likely, this is all just, I haven't seen the actual stuff yet, so this is just
Yeah.
what we were throwing out as ideas. Likely something to incorporate additional lighting, maybe some temporary lights or pedestrian lights that could be out there with some delineators or cones, pavement marking that could narrow up the intersection. I know I've heard Rite Aid is also going to be closed. So we were discussing potentially working up a pilot of one of those alternatives for the August, September timeframe to see if we could do something before winter and just kind of test out
Yeah.
whether or not something there would make a difference. And we would have to structure the pilot with VHB and DOT in coordination with them to make sure that it would all meet traffic safety concerns, and then make sure we have a way to collect some useful data on it too. So we'd have to figure out how we would do some additional pedestrian counting or monitoring. I'm sure we could work something in there, but these are all just kind of throwing some ideas at the wall to see what
Yeah.
sticks. So we should have a report soon.
and we'll have more follow-up discussion on potentially doing a pilot.
Other question was if there's been any further follow-up with Cedar Street and considerations for the runway drivers and high speeds, any
Yeah.
pilot ideas of putting planters in or anything of that sort? Or
Nothing specific
nothing?
advancement.
Yeah. Is there any more push from the neighborhood or?
I haven't heard anything.
Okay.
I had a follow-up on that as well. I would like to suggest that we consider scheduling a workshop at the site and all take a look at it, and we'll have that conversation with Bart as well. But I think it would be good for us to, go to the place instead of just, talking from memory, being there, and seeing what we're talking about, and then ideally, I think we use it as an opportunity to invite the neighborhood into a conversation about improving that entire area. What could you do there? And I'm not talking about repaving this but what could you do there to make this feel better?
Yeah.
So that we have something to work with.
You talk
And-
about placemaking, that used to be a public skating rink.
Yes.
The fire department flooded that area by the pumping station.
Really?
And yeah, with one of the old fire chiefs used to flood it every year, and kids would all skate there. So it was a big, like a park.
And so
Right
and
there
it-
by the
it-
railroad tracks?
Yeah, right next to the railroad.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too.
Always a fun time when the train comes and you go across real quick. But it might be a good neighborhood to look at slowly and think as we're thinking about our typologies. How would we identify this street, and how just so we get a feel for that when we're working with existing streets, because there are obviously.
That whole neighborhood's a play street.
It could.
Always has been.
It could very well be. Yeah, exactly. But there may also be a neighborhood street there that you don't want to designate as a play street because it's more of a through. But anyways,
Yeah.
so that would be my suggestion that we schedule something.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I
A
like
site
that.
visit for sometime now that we're in the warmer months, that we can go
Yeah.
out there and expect it reliably to be the weather to be good.
Who owns that piece? So there were, I don't know if they were cargo containers or what they were, there next to the tracks. So if you were to go in the wrong way, there on the left,
Right.
there's that space there. Who owns that space?
I'm guessing the railroad, because the railroad
No,
has
the
pretty
town, well, the
wide-
railroad has the right of way, and I think it may widen there, but the town owns a piece of land
Portion of-
all the way forward. I mean, I think the railroad structures they just installed might be very close to the boundary line between the railroad property and the town's property.
The town owns the pump station that's right there,
And,
so
and
it's-
all the way forward towards Elm Street.
Okay.
Which is, whatever, it's a good chunk of land, but, yeah, we have the GIS maps, I just don't know if I can find it quick enough, but,
Yeah, so there were some vehicles, or I guess stored there when they were working on the rail line. I guess that's what it was, and then they disappeared a little bit ago, and then it was just like vast wasteland, it was like the wide road plus all that space, and those other vehicles were gone.
Yeah, it definitely
Really-
could use some help to be more attractive and to be more functional.
yeah, it's been a dumping ground. People have parked like, even maybe abandoned cars or beater cars there. There've been tires and refrigerators dumped there. So it's been
Wow.
kind of, and it's unfortunate because every single
nuisance.
person who lives in that whole development, all the way back to the apartment buildings, has to go out that way. So everybody sees it.
So when we think about a site visit, so to speak, or an on-site meeting, however we want to call that, and you think about your summer, are there times or months that we should not think about scheduling something like this, as far as your travel plans or vacation plans are concerned?
Well, the next meeting, July 9th, oh, whatever, that's,
Maybe in August.
Well, I know I'm going to be away, when am I going to be away? August 10th or the 14th, whatever, that's a Sunday. But,
So that,
oh yeah, no, I won't be here.
okay. What about you, Austin? Do you have any plans that we should, or times that you know I'm not going to be here that week or whatever?
We can't do one weekend in August. I mean, I don't know. Would it be in place of the regular meeting, or?
Well, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Actually, I think the August regular meeting is while I'm away.
Ah,
It is that week, yeah.
Yeah.
That's-
I'm
that
not
would
going
be
to
the
be here for
second
August
Wednesday.
meeting.
good to know.
Unless it's rescheduled for a
Right.
Oh,
a daytime site visit.
We could reschedule it. I mean, the day. It
Well,
might be better to have it on a
I was gonna say,
weekend.
Are you thinking of something, if you're thinking something, late afternoon, I would think, a weekend is probably better because people are at work. But is that what you're thinking, is doing something during the daylight hours?
Well, I mean,
I mean, but which is, yeah,
Yeah.
obviously it's extended.
maybe start a little bit earlier, start at 6 or something like that on a regular meeting day. So we have daylight hours. It doesn't have to be a separate day, but I would be very happy to do it during the day as well, rather than waiting for the end of the day on a Wednesday when people come home. Although, it's like, what's the objective? Do we want to see how things are, and what happens when there's traffic, or?
See what, that is a good point. What are we looking for? Are we looking for what does it look like when people are coming in and out?
Right.
When they're ending their day and they're coming home from work or coming home from wherever, what does it look like?
Yeah,
How busy is it?
yeah.
The interesting thing about that area, that lot, is that it's actually almost kind of part of Elm Street too.
Mhm.
You know,
It doesn't.
What's the
It
word?
almost
It-
doesn't
it-
look like a street ending.
Yeah.
It's so wide.
Yeah.
And then you have that wide space next to it, and then the railroad tracks, and and
Yeah.
Elm Street. It's just this big space that is very ill-defined.
but whatever is done there is going to be reflected on Elm Street too.
Mm-hmm.
Because because it is so wide open that
That's true.
yeah, but
you'll
it's.
see whatever's
Yeah,
done.
exactly. So it's going to be looking at sightline distances in both directions as you're pulling out, but also for cars approaching on Elm Street. But yeah, the sidewalk is a way to see all of that,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And I always often think of when we do site walks, we have to consider the sightline distances for a truck versus motorcycle versus sports car. Everyone's at different elevations, and sometimes a sightline in a car looks perfectly fine and everything gets great, and then you pull up in a truck and it's like, great, we can't see anything.
Yeah.
So it's important to consider all the different users. Here is the tax map that shows that lot goes all the way forward. It's not a GIS map, but it's just a tax map. But this is the railroad right away, and we can't be sure that this isn't a railroad lot, but I'm pretty confident it's not, because it could be a separate lot owned by the railroad.
I think it says if you tap on it, if you do the eye on that side,
Oh,
right above the hand.
there goes the hunt.
Yeah, and then if you tap on that
Select
lot, it should
Lot.
give you information.
Oh, look at that.
Down in Newmarket.
There you go.
There we go.
All right. So August meeting, or shall we shoot for July then? Because you're not going to be here, and that would be too bad to know that you're not going to be here for that. We could do the sidewalk in July. It's a month out, so unless
Yeah.
Bart has some objections, no, we have some plan for that neighborhood already, and we want to make sure that it can coincide. I think we should consider maybe going out, spending the first part of the meeting there, and then reconvening here.
For the July 9th meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, no, that does sound good.
Okay. Great.
It's a plan.
It's a plan then.
So it
Excellent.
would be- Okay, so meeting there, maybe at 6?
We can also meet here and go there together. I don't know what,
What it-
I think it might be easier to just meet there and then.
I'm
come back
happy to
here.
meet there. I'm
Yeah.
riding my bike, so that'll be fine.
It's, not that we're a quasi judicial board, but you have to be careful of
Yeah.
carpooling for, I'm not so sure it really applies to advisory boards, but I know for your council or planning board, you really don't want to carpool. Somebody will sue you.
um,
Oh, because you're,
You're you're-
possibility of having a conversation, yeah.
Wherever 3 or more.
Yeah.
Oh,
gathered.
interesting.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can do it for social, but if you're going to a meeting, it just becomes problematic.
Yeah.
It's better just not to do it.
Interesting.
All right, so we'll meet there. And we'll say 6 PM? Does that work?
Yeah, no, actually, that work.
Yeah? Okay.
I'll just be coming from yoga, so I'll be.
Oh, you know what might be happening is the master plan steering committee meeting beforehand.
It will be, yep.
Okay.
That's at 5:30.
Oh,
So then we can't
would be
do that.
Significant conflict.
Right.
Okay. Then we could meet at our regular time. I mean, the daylight will be plenty.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
could do that.
Does
Yeah.
that work for you?
Yeah.
Yeah? Does that work for you?
Yes, so we'll meet at 7, and we'll just,
Okay.
okay. So 7, at the abandoned lodge, okay.
We should call it, Bolio. Chief Bolio's first name, what was his name?
Don't know.
Sue's watching, she's gonna kill me for not remembering.
And then the I guess also, okay, so we're gonna meet there. What was I going to say? Oh, unless there is something else that we should consider as far as the do we want to invite other people to the meeting? Should we, or is it just us having a little sidewalk, or do we want to make this into something bigger? I guess was my thought. I'm remembering it now.
I would
Bart
say
weigh in.
Bart needs to weigh in on
Yeah,
that, because
yeah.
he's been having some of those neighborhood focus group meetings, and he may have a plan for that neighborhood.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll just do this, and if there is a focus group meeting that kind of falls in there, then we can take advantage of that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to suggest that we call it a night, is that,
Are you asking for a motion to adjourn?
yes.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Thank you.
I've got to do something to, so it's in the minutes to prove that I was here.
Oh, you've said plenty.